The day Jenna and Marcus signed the lease for the small apartment at 17 Elm Street, they felt a rare spark of excitement, convinced they had finally found a place that could feel like home. The building was old, its bricks worn and ivy-clad, yet it radiated an old-world charm that made them overlook the slightly musty smell and creaking floorboards. But as they crossed the threshold, an unsettling chill ran down their spines, almost as if the walls were watching them, yet they brushed it off as fatigue from the long day of moving boxes, arranging furniture, and unpacking their belongings. Unaware that the building had a dark past involving previous tenants disappearing without a trace, and that the locals whispered about a shadowy figure glimpsed through the windows at night, a figure that had no right to be there. And as the first night fell, strange noises began to echo through the apartment, whispers that carried no source, soft thuds in empty rooms, the distant scraping of furniture when no one was home. And though Marcus rationalized that it was the old pipes and the settling of the building, Jenna's unease only deepened when she felt icy fingers brush her arm as she reached for her suitcase. And by the time they attempted to sleep, both found their dreams invaded by distorted visions of past tenants trapped behind walls, screaming silently. And when Jenna awoke to find Marcus staring blankly at the ceiling, muttering words she could not understand, she realized their life in this apartment was about to change in ways they could never imagine. And as they navigated the first week, unexplained power outages, sudden cold drafts, and objects moving on their own became routine, leaving them questioning their sanity, while a creeping sense of dread tightened around them, hinting that the true nature of 17 Elm Street was not only malevolent but deeply tied to their own fears and secrets, and that what they thought was a fresh start would soon unravel into a nightmare from which there would be no easy escape. Within days of moving in, Jenna began noticing things she could not explain. Books she had not touched ended up on the floor. Mysterious scratches appeared along the walls, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway struck 13 at midnight, a sound neither of them could rationalize, while Marcus tried to dismiss it as mere coincidence. But one night, as Jenna walked toward the kitchen for water, she saw a fleeting reflection in the mirror that looked exactly like her, but with hollow, black eyes staring back, causing her to stumble backward in terror. And when she recounted the incident to Marcus, he initially laughed it off, until he too began seeing shadows moving in the corners of his vision and hearing soft, urgent whispers calling his name. And when they tried to speak to their landlord, he seemed unusually evasive, changing the topic quickly and insisting that everything in the apartment was perfectly safe. Yet the unease grew as their neighbors avoided eye contact, muttered warnings about past residents, and hinted that some rooms were better left untouched. And one evening, a letter slipped under their door, written in a shaky, frantic hand, warning them to leave before it was too late. But neither Jenna nor Marcus could comprehend what danger could be so pervasive, and as the week wore on, the strange occurrences intensified, flickering lights revealing faces in the shadows, doors opening and closing on their own, and a chilling sensation that someone or something was watching them constantly, until finally Jenna discovered a hidden diary in the back of a closet, belonging to a woman who had lived in the apartment decades before, filled with frantic entries about feeling trapped, being followed, and hearing voices that no one else could hear. And it became painfully clear that the apartment had a history of consuming the lives of those who entered, feeding on fear, and that the warnings were not mere superstition, but desperate cries from those who had suffered before them. By the third week, the apartment's presence had become impossible to ignore. With walls whispering secrets, cold spots forming in hallways, and the sensation of being touched by unseen hands, while Jenna found herself sleepwalking through rooms she had never consciously entered, often waking to find objects rearranged into disturbing patterns. And Marcus, now sleepless and paranoid, began recording every sound, only to find hours of static filled with whispered threats and incomprehensible chanting, yet neither of them could leave. As if an invisible force held them in place, and one night they awoke to find every mirror in the apartment reflecting not their faces but images of previous tenants, their expressions twisted in eternal fear, while a voice echoed through the apartment, reciting names and dates of deaths that had occurred within its walls. And when Jenna tried to confront the voice, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the living room, forming the silhouette of a man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin, moving toward them silently. And in that moment, both realized that the apartment was sentient, feeding on their terror, learning their habits, and growing stronger with each fearful thought. And despite frantic attempts to call for help, their phones displayed only static, and their neighbors remained silent, with only the wind through the broken windows carrying faint, urgent warnings. And as the night deepened, the line between reality and nightmare blurred completely, leaving Jenna and Marcus trapped in a waking horror where every sound, shadow, and reflection threatened to consume what little sanity they had left. And they began to understand that the apartment had its own intelligence, a dark consciousness that thrived on human fear, and that the longer they stayed, the more it would manipulate their perceptions, forcing them into terrors beyond imagination, until their very identities were at risk of being erased entirely, leaving only husks of the people who had dared to live within 17 Elm Street. As the days blurred into nights, Jenna and Marcus's mental state deteriorated rapidly, with paranoia turning into hysteria, hallucinations blending seamlessly with reality, and sleep offering no respite, while objects in the apartment began to move violently, breaking and rearranging themselves into grotesque symbols, and voices became clearer, often whispering secrets only the two of them knew, revealing fears and sins they had never spoken aloud. And when Jenna attempted to leave, the doors slammed shut, windows refused to open, and the walls themselves seemed to shift, trapping them in a labyrinth of their own home. While Marcus, once rational and protective, began talking to invisible entities as if they were old friends, writing frantic warnings on the walls in charcoal. And one night, a storm hit the city, lightning illuminating the apartment in stark flashes, revealing figures emerging from the floorboards and ceilings, all of them twisted reflections of past residents, screaming silently. And Jenna, in sheer desperation, tried to destroy the apartment with fire, only to find that flames would not touch the walls, leaving her powerless, as the apartment seemed to mock their suffering. And when they finally realized the only way to survive might be to confront the apartment directly, they discovered a hidden basement door covered in symbols, pulsing with a dark, unnatural energy, beckoning them downward, promising the truth but threatening to take what remained of their minds. And as they descended, the air thickened with the smell of decay. The walls whispered louder, and they understood that the apartment was no longer just a building, but a living entity, feeding on human fear and slowly consuming the very essence of anyone who dared to live within it. While every shadow seemed to stretch toward them, every whisper promising torment, and every corner threatened their fragile sanity, leaving them teetering on the edge of complete mental collapse as the apartment prepared its final test of endurance and courage. Asterisk. In the basement, Jenna and Marcus found remnants of past tenants, tattered clothes, journals filled with desperate scribbles, and personal belongings left behind as if the residents had vanished mid-act. And the air was thick with whispers, each one trying to lure them into different corners, promising safety or death depending on their choice. And as they moved cautiously, the floor beneath them groaned and cracked, revealing glimpses of endless darkness below. And then a figure emerged, neither fully human nor entirely shadow, speaking in a voice that resonated inside their skulls, telling them that the apartment would release them only if they truly faced their fears, and in a harrowing trial of courage, they had to confront visions of their deepest regrets, betrayals, and guilt, while the walls themselves seemed to mirror their thoughts, twisting and contorting to mock and terrify. And just as Jenna was about to collapse from sheer mental exhaustion, Marcus grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a faintly glowing door at the far end of the basement. And with one final effort of will, they ran through the doorway together, the apartment shrieking in anger and despair as if losing its prey. And they emerged into the dim morning sunlight, battered and terrified but alive. Yet when they turned back to see the apartment, it appeared ordinary, almost welcoming, its windows reflecting a serene calm, hiding the horrors inside. And as they walked away, they realized that the true terror was not entirely behind them. The apartment remained, waiting patiently for its next tenants. And somewhere deep in their minds, a lingering echo reminded them that fear is never fully escaped, only postponed, and that 17 Elm Street would continue its cycle, consuming those foolish enough to call it home, leaving only memories of fear and the chilling understanding that some places are alive, patient, and hungry, and that survival is merely the beginning of a lifelong shadow cast by what they had endured inside its walls.